According to CNN, our oceans are much warmer than we previously thought. They are also heating up faster than was believed, driven by climate change caused by humans. These warming oceans are also causing polar ice sheets to melt faster and are causing sea levels to rise. They could rise up to a meter in 2100. That would mean hundreds of millions of people could be forced to leave their homes.
Reuters reports that a winter storm has pummeled the U.S. Midwest, stranding motorists in Missouri and canceling dozens of flights. The weather system, which started as rain from Mexico, turned into snow and is affecting an 1,800-mile section of the United States from Colorado to the mid-Atlantic. The colossal storm hit Kansas and Missouri on Friday, and again on Saturday, as it stretched into parts of Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. At least 5 people have died as a result of weather-related auto accidents in Missouri and Kansas.
The name of this small fishing boat sums up the mood in Palu. Tragedy survived waves as high as palm trees on September 28, while many other boats were destroyed, like the one owned by Hamidi. For months, he has not been able to earn a living.
Because my boat and nets are damaged, I cannot work and just sit here doing nothing. I'm disappointed, but I can only wait and see what the government will do for me.
Others are not so patient. Ruslan has started to rebuild his house right by the sea. After his village was destroyed, his community moved to the hills. Many now have returned to restart their business, selling dried fish, despite the government plan to relocate them to safer areas.
When I'm in the hills, I can only eat and sleep. Here I can earn money because fish has already been coming in. I have to work.
The government plans to build temporary houses for 1,500 families, but survivors complain the construction process is too slow.
After living in tents for months, survivors here in Palu are growing impatient. Extreme heat and the rainy season making it unbearable to live here. Despite the outpouring of help, survivors say it's taking too long for their lives to return to normal.
Aid from all over the world has reached the area, but some promised donations have yet to arrive. A government advisor who was in charge of rebuilding Aceh after the Indian Ocean tsunami in 2004 blames a lack of coordination and too many regulations.
If Sulawesi, Palu still remains like this, okay, and nobody will donate, okay, because they see a very clear indication that things are very slow there. That means there's something wrong, right?
But the government denies that rebuilding is slow and says it's very capable of dealing with the aftermath of the disaster. In contrast from the relief effort after the tsunami in Aceh, this one is relying less on foreign aid organizations and is trying to involve local communities as much as possible.
In this case, we were only asked to support them with support services in terms of logistics, ITT and base camp support. This is somewhat new for us because we have many other services that we could provide, but as stronger the national societies get, the more they will shift towards these support services.
For many, this new approach shows that Indonesia has come a long way since previous disasters. But Ruslan and his neighbors say they are beginning to restart their lives with or without help from the government. Stepvassen, Al Jazeera, Palu.
Heavy fighting in eastern Syria. The last sliver of land remaining within ISIL's control is under attack. The Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces, SDF, are in a final push to oust ISIL fighters from their last remaining stronghold in eastern Syria. SDF commanders say they're making some progress, backed by US airstrikes, which have been stepped up since Donald Trump announced the withdrawal of American troops from Syria.
This storage is full of weapons and ammunition we took from ISIL fighters after days of fighting here.
This assault on ISIL is the final chapter of a conflict that began more than 4 years ago when the group seized vast parts of Iraq and Syria and declared a caliphate. Iraqi government forces declared victory over ISIL in December 2017. Despite that, analysts say their ideology is also very much alive in the region.
Territorially, it was pushed back. Ideologically, it's still there. The Sunni complaints that they have been totally run over and everybody ganged up against them, that refrain seems to be still very potent. And therefore, radicalism of the IS kind or any other kind has deep roots and a lot of potential. And that's why it has not been totally eliminated.
Fighting between the SDF and ISIL is centered around the town of Hajin on the banks of the Euphrates River, close to the Syrian border with Iraq. The Hajin area was once home to 60,000 people. Most fled to live in makeshift camps for the displaced. As renewed fighting intensifies, more people are joining them. Here, dozens of the newly displaced wait for tents and blankets in the bitter cold. Some say they fled on foot because they heard the US coalition warplanes were bombing vehicles. Back on the front lines, SDF fighters are preparing for a long slog. They estimate the fight in Hajin will last 2 to 3 months. That may seem like a surprisingly long time given the size of the area they are dealing with. ISIL-held cities with populations 3 times greater fell within days. The difference is that in those battles, ISIL fighters strategically retreated, choosing to abandon their positions.
According to Digital Trends, a cycling mask recently featured at the 2019 Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas could help athletes as well as motorcyclists, runners, and everyday bicycle commuters. Made by the French company Arpur, the mask filters out harmful air pollutants like toxic particles, fine particles, diesel, pollen, and viruses using a nanofiltration system that filters particles between 10 microns and 0.04 microns in size. The system features a replaceable filter and an active carbon layer which should absorb harmful volatile organic compounds, VOC, and gases.
Friday's prayers in Sudan ended with calls for more protests demanding the resignation of President Omar al-Bashir, and the calls were heeded in several cities. Security forces again fired tear gas at some protesters. Even hospitals have been in the firing line. In what Amnesty International is describing as an outrageous violation of international law, security forces stormed a hospital on Wednesday. They were looking for protesters injured during anti-government demonstrations in Durman, Sudan's second-largest city. Bullets and tear gas were fired at patients and doctors. They've walked out on strike in protest. The Sudanese government says it's investigating what happened.
The security forces actually followed the protesters inside the hospital and attacked them. And also some of them were injured, and they used tear gas and live ammunition. And a horrible situation. And I think even in conflict situation, attacking hospitals, that's considered a war crime.
Wednesday's protests in Durman were reported to be the largest in 3 weeks of demonstrations against the 29-year rule of President Omar al-Bashir. Police and security forces have responded with force. At least 3 people were killed on Wednesday. Rights groups say the number killed since protests began is at least 40. The government says the total is 22. President Omar al-Bashir seems defiant as his party threatens to use force against those protesting his rule.
Give us a week. Let's see who would dare challenge. Just 1 week. We don't want people without permits protesting. Those protesting, and especially those who are armed, we will cut off their heads.
The protesters accuse President Bashir of mismanaging the economy, ignoring corruption, and causing the world's second highest inflation rate.
The current wave of anti-government protests is regarded as the biggest challenge to President Bashir since he came to power in 1989. Some opposition groups have lent their support to those demanding his step down. Calls for his resignation continue, with more protests planned into the week, all triggered by the country's economic crisis.
Queues for bread are common. The price of a loaf tripled recently. The ruling party says it wants Bashir, who remains wanted by the International Criminal Court for war crimes, to be re-elected next year. Protesters seem determined to prevent that, with the strongest challenge yet to his leadership. Hiba Morgan, Al Jazeera, Khartoum.
Preparing for battle. These men are members of the Free Syrian Army's Hamza Brigade. Their allies, the Turkish military, are on a war footing and preparing for an offensive on the Kurdish-held city of Manbij in northern Syria. These fighters say they will not be left behind.
With or without the US withdrawal, we will complete this military offensive. We are ready for our leadership's order.
Manbij is controlled by the US-backed Kurdish YPG. Turkey considers it the Syrian branch of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, or PKK, which it recognizes as a terrorist group. In the ranks of this brigade are Syrian Kurds who say the YPG cannot be the Kurds' legitimate representative in the war in Syria.
Most of the Kurds fled to Germany, Iraqi Kurdistan, because of the YPG's oppression. They force youth, even girls, for military service on the front lines. They charge unaffordable taxes.
Many people in areas liberated by the Free Syrian Army support the military offensive.
We're surrounded by the PKK and regime forces, and the population's living in fear. If more places are liberated and the YPG is gone, we can have a better business life.
This is Akel Mountain. The Turkish military has been based there since Al-Bab was liberated in early 2017. It is one of 2 military bases which will coordinate the expected upcoming offensive on the eastern side of the Euphrates River and the city of Manbij.
Turkey says Kurdish civilians will not be targeted, but some people in Manbij are not convinced.
Since we learnt the US will withdraw, many of our friends volunteered to join Manbij Military Council to defend our city. We will protect ourselves.
Of course we have fears. Now we live in peace, we freely perform our religion, but when other groups come, there will be corruption.
Day and night, the Turkish army continues to strengthen its forces inside Syria, sending a message that the offensive could start soon. Sinem Köseoğlu, Al Jazeera, Northern Syria.
Digital Trends reports that as the United States government shutdown enters day 22, problems are beginning to surface in the world of internet security. According to a report by Netcraft, more than 80 transport layer security (TLS) certificates that are used by .gov websites have expired and have not been renewed. TLS certificates are crucial to a secure internet, giving sites permission to use encrypted communication and authenticate the identity of the certificate holder. The certificates require renewal to confirm that the site is still secure and encrypted. Currently, the affected sites include vital government services like NASA, the U.S. Department of Justice, and the Court of Appeals. These sites could now be vulnerable to cyber attack.
According to Geek.com, new research shows that ocean warming is accelerating more than we thought, and if left untreated, could further destroy marine life in the next few years. Zeke Housefather, a UC Berkeley graduate student and co-author of the research paper, told the press, "If you want to see where global warming is happening, look in our oceans. Ocean heating is a very important indicator of climate change, and we have robust evidence that it is warming more rapidly than we thought."
According to a report by Reuters on Saturday, a winter storm that hammered the Midwest with heavy snowfall, causing several roadway deaths and stranding some motorists and canceling dozens of flights, is headed east toward Washington. U.S. Weather Prediction Center meteorologist Andrew Orison said that the storm hit Kansas and Missouri on Friday before extending into parts of Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio on Saturday. The weather system, which reportedly started as rain from Mexico, is forecast to affect an 1,800-mile corridor of the United States from Colorado to the Mid-Atlantic.
Holding flashlights, thousands of Colombians gathered in various cities demanding their country's attorney general steps down. Nestor Humberto Martinez is accused of covering up irregularities and bribes paid in Colombia by the Brazilian construction giant Odebrecht, at the center of the biggest corruption scandal in the region.
We Colombians are tired of seeing the powerful steal money and nothing happening. Our institutions, our justice system are kept captive, and we want them back.
Security forces were unable to prevent protesters in front of the Attorney General's headquarters, taking down the office's flag and burning it. In 2015, Martinez was the legal advisor of Grupo Aval, Colombia's biggest financial group, owned by Luis Carlos Sarmiento, the country's richest man. Aval partnered with Odebrecht, winning a $1.6 billion contract to build a major motorway. But in a series of documents, Jorge Enrique Pisano, then the auditor of Aval, discovered more than $30 million in illegal payments and informed Martinez about them. Yet in a dramatic twist, Pisano, his son, and a third witness have since died in what are said to be suspicious circumstances, while Martinez became the man in charge of investigating the crimes. Odebrecht has admitted in a plea bargain with the United States Department of Justice of paying $11 million in bribes to Colombian politicians, but that's just a fraction of the total amount of bribes it has allegedly paid here in Colombia, and the Attorney General denies any prior knowledge of the payments and continues to reject calls for his resignation. Prosecutors have pressed charges against high-ranking officials in a number of countries, including former presidents. While in Colombia only mid-level officials have been charged, Martinez has recused himself from 2 related cases, but many fear a complete and impartial investigation will not happen in Colombia as long as he remains in office.
The issue is that Odebrecht has financed the presidential campaigns of the 2 most important political parties in Colombia. They paid ex-ministers, senators, congressmen. If the Attorney General falls, the entire structure falls with him.
Just days ago, Peru's Attorney General resigned under increasing public pressure after he dismissed 2 lead prosecutors in the scandal. Martinez's powerful political backers continue supporting him, but it's unclear if he'll be able to withstand the growing calls for his removal. Alessandro Ampietti, Al Jazeera, Bogotá.
It is the country's biggest car maker, employing more than 40,000 workers in the UK. But Jaguar Land Rover's in trouble. It's struggling to turn a profit. Reviving the luxury brand's fortunes means cutting jobs. 4,500 are expected to go. Most are in management and marketing. Some production jobs may also go. The company's been hit by a perfect storm of problems. Sales in China, one of Jaguar Land Rover's biggest markets, have slumped. Trade tensions with the US have led to a fall in consumers making big purchases. The company's also been affected by a fall in global demand for diesel cars, 90% of Jaguar Land Rover's production. And at home, there are big worries over the UK's competitiveness post-Brexit. The company says a bad exit deal could cost it $1.5 billion a year. The government's promising to help those who have lost their jobs.
It is a brilliant, skilled workforce. It's a real asset to this country. And whatever the terms of the announcement, we will do everything that we can to make sure that they can find jobs that make use of their really valuable skills.
This isn't the first blow to Jaguar Land Rover's workforce. The company, owned by India's Tata Motors, already cut 1,000 temporary contract workers at its plant near Birmingham. It also recently announced it would move all production of the Land Rover Discovery to a new plant in EU member Slovakia, employing 3,000 people. Jaguar Land Rover has been forced to streamline. It is the painful reality of uncertain times, costing thousands of people their livelihoods. Niamh Barker, Al Jazeera.
The sleek, clean boulevards of Budapest. This is how an increasingly authoritarian government wants them to look. No refugees or illegal immigrants, and now no homeless people either.
We are just trying to enable our authorities to step up against something which we believe is against human nature, human dignity, and we would like public spaces to get their meaning back and operate as they were intended.
It's not a decision the government took lightly. A previous attempt was ruled a violation of human dignity by the Constitutional Court, so the government changed the constitution itself. All of which is heartbreaking to people like Janusz Torok. Janusz lives in a caravan after he lost his home, his job, even his family, when a house fire and no insurance left him with crippling debt.
I'm afraid of it. I can't say better. I'm afraid. It can happen any time. I wake up every morning scared that someone may knock on my door and say, "We can take your stuff away, go elsewhere."
The government insists it's looking after the people being swept off the streets.
We take care of them, we provide shelter, provisions and all the support that is required.
Not so, say social workers.
We believe that the shelter system is not going to solve this problem ever. And the government still thinks about opening some new shelters. but the numbers show that there are more than 30,000 people living homeless in Hungary. At the moment, there are 11,000 sheltered places.
Cycling through the city, volunteers carrying food and blankets search for those who've not made it to a shelter for the night. In a railway station underpass where dozens once slept, they find just 3 people.
It's too many people in the shelters, so there is 100 person and there is more than 100 person in the shelter, so it's too crowded.
And overcrowding in the shelters, say the volunteers, means many homeless people have gone into hiding, making them even more vulnerable to the elements. Shelters like these, this one is a private facility, barely come close to meeting the needs of the homeless on the streets. And while it's obviously a good idea to get people off the streets in below zero conditions like this, and volunteers are doing what they can, that's not the point behind the government's decision to criminalise homelessness in Hungary. One social worker described it as projecting power over the powerless. Jonah Hull, Al Jazeera, Budapest.
According to Politico, White House officials are letting congressional Republicans know that the end to the government shutdown isn't likely, even if the president declares a national emergency at the southern border. The warning was issued during Trump's Thursday visit to the southern U.S. border. 3 sources with knowledge of the conversations confirmed that Republicans are being warned. Many government workers have grown hopeful that a national emergency declaration may end the political standoff that has partially shut down the government for 3 weeks.
According to Reuters, Paris police fired water cannon and tear gas to repel yellow vest demonstrators on Saturday in the 9th straight weekend of protests against French President Emmanuel Macron's economic reforms. Thousands of protesters also marched through the Grand Boulevard shopping area, close to where a major gas explosion in a bakery killed 2 firefighters and injured nearly 50 people. Central Paris was in lockdown amid fears of violence by radical elements in the yellow vest
Philippine
movement.
President Rodrigo Duterte has warned of a possible shutdown of hotels surrounding the massively polluted Manila Bay. Duterte made the statement January 8th following his order to put the 2,000 square kilometer bay under rehabilitation. The president reportedly said, "Put water treatment facilities in your hotels or else I will close you. Do not dare me." There are reportedly at least 50 other establishments accused by the Department of Environment of disposing of untreated wastewater, including clinics, hospitals, and factories. He said hotels contributed largely to the contamination of the Manila Bay. However, the Tourism Congress of the Philippines said waste coming from hotels was a small percentage compared to other pollutants stretching across the bay. Meanwhile, the Department of Environment said 47 billion pesos, about $900 million, will be needed to bring back the old Manila Bay. The cleanup will start on January 27th.
According to Digital Trends, a Netherlands-based startup, Spacelife Origin, is aiming to be the first company to deliver a baby in space. Egbert Edelbroek of Spacelife Origin told reporters, "We owe it to our children and future generations. Humanity is facing increasing threats to life on Earth." Spacelife Origin plans multiple missions and hopes to enable a pregnant woman to give birth in space. This will be achieved during a 24 to 36-hour mission guided by a team of medical experts.